Okay, so today is the 16th of January 2022, and Ricardo Bofill, as you know, died two days ago. So we'll pay our commemorative homage to him today. So let me read a little bit about him. So Ricardo Bofill Levy was born in December 1939, but he died on the 14th of 2022. Was a Spanish, sorry, this I didn't renew my writing. I mean, it's not mine. I took it from Wikipedia. So it has to become was a Spanish architect. He founded Ricardo Bofill Taller de Arquitectura in 1963 and developed it into a leading international architectural and urban design practice. According to architectural historian Andrew Ayers, his creations rank among the most impressive buildings of the 20th century. Born in late 1939, in December actually, just after the end of the Spanish Civil War, Ricardo Bofill grew up in a well-to-do family with deep Catalan and Barcelonese roots. His grandfather, Joseph Maria Bofill Pichot, had been involved in prominent local institutions such as the Institute for Catalan Studies, the Catalan Institute of Natural History, and the Royal Academy of Sciences and Arts of Barcelona. His father, Emilio Bofill, was an architect, builder, and developer who studied at Escola Técnica Superior de Arquitectura de Barcelona, Catalonia's oldest professional architecture school. Ricardo Bofill would later describe him as a Republican, liberal, progressive, austere, and logical. Ricardo's mother, Maria Levi, was an Italian of Jewish descent born in Venice, who became a prominent sponsor of Catalan literature and culture in post-war Barcelona. Bofill studied at the Lycée Français de Barcelone. He spent much of his youth traveling, first with his family and later on his own, and developed a passion for vernacular architecture. His first project was a summer house in Ibiza, completed in 1960. That year, he enrolled at the Escola Técnica Superior de Arquitectura de Barcelona, where he engaged in student activism with the unauthorized Unified Socialist Party of Catalonia. In 1958, he was arrested in a demonstration and expelled from the university and from Spain. He moved to Switzerland and completed his formal architectural training at the Haute École d'Art et de Design, Genève. In 1963, Ricardo Bofill and a group of close friends created Ricardo Bofill Taller de Arquitectura, or the Ricardo Bofill Architecture Workshop, initially hosted in his father's construction business with offices on Plaza de Catalunya in the center of Barcelona. Building on Catalan traditions of craftsmanship, he enlisted architects and engineers, but also writers and artists into a multidisciplinary effort, which later branched into urban design and urban planning. The team experimented on original methodologies based on three-dimensional modular geometries, such as those of the Gaudi district in Reus, El Castillo de Kafka in San Per de Ribes, above Sitges, Xanadu, and La Muralla Roja in Calp. So I have sometimes some difficulties to pronounce. I'm not sure I pronounce correctly because Catalan is different from Spanish. And, you know, I'm tempted to pronounce, you know, like in the Spanish language, but it's actually Catalan. The same thinking was developed on a larger scale with the project La Ciudad en el Espacio, the city and space, whose construction started in the Moratalaz area of Madrid in 1970, but was abruptly stopped by Francoist Mayor Carlos Arias Navarro. It was instead realized with the construction of Walden 7 in Sant Just Desvern near Barcelona, from 1970 to 1975. These projects were recognized as exemplars of critical regionalism and can be viewed as a reaction against both architectural modernism and the Francoist dictatorship in Spain. I'm not so sure these works are actually belong to critical regionalism, and we'll talk about them in detail when we arrive at the pictures. Here was the man, probably, around the age of 80. He's still rather, handsome and charming. He was, known for being a charming personality. There is much to say about Ricardo Bofill, and I think I am tempted to describe him in these terms, that he was kind of a little bit, in a way, like Salvador Dali, who was an anarchist and a monarchist at the same time, an anarchist and a monarchist. And this sounds oxymoronical, and it is oxymoronic. So I think he had a revolutionary side, but I also think he had a reactionary side. And that reactionary side is shown in his works in France. Here he is as a young man with significantly unbuttoned shirt. Obviously, everything worked for him then. So let's look at a little bit at his incredible offices, his headquarters, which were and are incredible. And in my opinion, some of the most romantic and impressive architecture offices in recent times, if not all times. Look at the interior. This was a factory that they transformed into their offices, and it's surreal. It's also real. I don't know if you know, Ricardo Bofill and Taller de Arquitectura, his office, were famous in the 70s for saying, for us, Magritte is more important than Miss, that is Miss van der Rohe. So this says a lot about them at that time. For them, surrealism was more important than the minimalist, if I can call it so, the minimalist aesthetics, rather, restrictive, of Miss van der Rohe. It's hard not to be envious of these beautiful surroundings. It really is, because, they are very spacious, rooms. I don't even know if the word room is appropriate. And then there is this, funambulesque, elements that belong to the old factory. And all in all, it's an artistic, cultured, environment in which you can only create, I think, an architecture that is rather, kind of inspired by it and equal to it even. The exterior is also engaging, romantic, and even in a way ecological, if we are to notice the ivy that is climbing happily on the concrete structure. I also like the fact that the patina of time, the passage of time, is not ignored. So again, working in such let's call it an office, although I think that the word is not appropriate, because an office is an office, very rarely has any romantic aspirations. But this is a very romantic setting. And also the ruin, which testifies about the passage of time. The interiors, of course, are splendid and comfortable. Anyway, he was, coming from a well-to-do family, and this is shown in the headquarters. And is this conjunction between the domestic and the office is brought into the home and the home into the office. So there is a certain level of domesticity, even though princely domesticity, and the office activity. So this is near Barcelona, and perhaps the most famous, most valid work was built not far away from it, Walden 7, and we are going to see it. I wonder how you would feel, working in such an environment. It probably would inspire you to be, equally poetic and romantic, and even, with touches of, I don't know if the word megalomania is totally appropriate, but with an aspiration for something, majestic. I mean, how many architects in the world, can afford such a, I would say such a beautiful, environment for the architectural activities? Not too many. And not too many have the inspiration to leave the building in good measure as it was, even if in a state of partial decay. And I think this setting, and that's why I began with with their office, with their headquarters, had an impact on who they were at the beginning. Taller de Arquitectura and Ricardo Bofill. Look at this. It's half of the structures are obviously destined for a different function, and some of them even left useless, and that's okay. If we could build like this today, it would be good. I think it would be inspiring, just as what we look at is inspiring. The vivacity of the industrial ruin is for all to see, and when it is complemented by present day interventions and a lot of green, you get what we look at here. It's a citadel in a way, a medieval citadel, but also a modern citadel. And of course, nature itself is splendid here. I wish we could build, I wish he himself and they themselves would have built in this way. Unfortunately, this didn't really happen, although some touches of what we see here can be seen in their later works. Look at this huge table, I mean, this is a grandiose table, but I guess they deserved it at that time, at least at that time. Lots of books, because we read that his mother was very involved in culture and literature, and I think something of that. Plus, let us not forget, we read that his mother was born in Venice, in Italy. So there is something of the Venetian spirit here coming to Barcelona somehow, through the mother. This is how it looked like before they took over. it's a dramatic architecture, but you know, drama is often part of architecture, of the one that deserves the name to be called architecture. Sculpturalness, you know, and there is a romantic spirit here, and you are going to see it exemplified in their first works quite quite convincingly and abundantly also. So this is near Barcelona, and we are going to see very soon what they built in the proximity of the headquarters. If I am to compare, you know, this architectural environment with, let's say, Taliesin West by Frank Lloyd Wright, well, in the case of Taliesin West by Frank Lloyd Wright, we only have his vision. It was a building or a complex of buildings built by the architect, the North American architect, for himself. There is no connection with the culture of a place besides, you know, the connection with the desert. Here we are dealing with something else. It's the industrial you know, past of the building. There is also the proximity to Barcelona. It is Europe. So it's a building which, yes, it has a, you know, the ramifications in time of a certain complexity. And, you know, here you see the Walden 7 housing complex, which is one of their earliest works and is a good one. Seen from the headquarters. This was not built by them. It existed there. Now, but before we arrive at Walden 7, let's look at a few other works. It might be that the T is missing here. Sorry, Nicaragua 99 is an early work by them in Barcelona, and I think it's an excellent work, a very good work. It's modern through and through, but because of the use of the brick and, you know, not an extensive use of glass, and even where there is glass, there is a fragmentation of the glass in smaller you know, segments. I think the work is, I wish I had more pictures with it, but I think it's a very good urban insertion with a housing project, with an apartment building. Now this is another one, but it might be maybe in Catalan, because I see here again but here both the R and the T are missing. Another work which I find very good, and it's very good because it doesn't say no to the local crafts, and we see here an embroidered brickwork. You know, again, this is not also, I shouldn't say again, but this is some kind of an obsession for me with a modernity which does not say no to the ornament. And here we have a certain level of ornamentation, which is obvious and which is, I think, beneficial to the building. Another good early work by Taller de Arquitectura and RICARDO BOFILL. And it's a work which it does have individuality, but not an aggressive individuality, and it is, you know, connected with the culture of the street and the culture of the city. Now we arrive at something more dramatic, and here is RICARDO BOFILL and Taller de Arquitectura in their more revolutionary stands Waldon 7. It's a, housing complex, rather unique, and I think it's very successful. We see in the foreground the headquarters, their office, and in the background the majestic, Waldon 7, the housing complex, which is quite dramatic. It's sculptural, is innovative, and it's not touched, detrimentally by what we call postmodernism. It's still a modern work. It has vibration. It has what I see here is multiplicity in unity. I see the small individual apartments which collaborate, cooperate to create a unity. And the void within the big atrium, the vertical space within is maybe paradoxically is the one that unites everybody around it. And it's quite this void, just like in the hotels by John Portman, but in the case of the John Portman hotels, the giant atriums don't actually have a lot of signs of life around it besides the sculpturalness of the atrium. Here is something else. Now, of course, these are not as tall, as big as the hotels of John Portman, but plastically, artistically, architectonically, they are very, very rich. And, we see these small windows here, they punctuate the interior, they create a certain movement that, brings life to the symmetries otherwise of the building. I see these buildings as truly being able to unite the individual with the collective, or to create multiplicity in unity. It's a social project. The apartments are very small, but I think I would gladly live here because despite the fact that they are small, you feel you belong to a larger entity, and the larger entity is actually the collectiveness of the project. You can tell the building was conceived from a position which didn't reject what in French is called l'effet c'est nous. The effect is us, not just l'effet c'est moi. The effect is me. So this is an important aspect of this kind of architecture. And, they remain unique, these projects. And then the courageous use of color and the courageous use of the labyrinth. There is a labyrinthical imagination at work, and then there is the chromatic imagination, and the two together create, I think, a work that perhaps even Magritte would have liked, and who knows, maybe even miss. It's a very good work, and it passed and will pass, I think, the test of time, the passage of time. Now, we see here, people, maybe students in architecture or architects wandering through this labyrinth of corridors, exterior and otherwise, staircases and all the rest. Yeah, I think it is an architecture classroom or something. They are probably students experiencing the building, and I think I didn't see it in person, but I have the feeling that it is an experience not to be ignored. These buildings communicate togetherness, but they communicate togetherness without saying no to the individual. And this is important, to have, as I said, both multiplicity and unity. Here is someone maybe from their office photographing the model. And then in the distance, we see the built work. They use geometry, very strict geometry. And through the manipulations of this strict geometry, they arrive of mystery. And this is maybe a paradox. There is mystery because of the intricacies of manipulating geometry with a labyrinthic state of mind, so to speak. I mean, just for this work, and Riccardo Bofill would have deserved, you know, a place in the history of, you know, modern architecture or contemporary architecture or late architecture. If we consider that this building was built about half a century ago, but it's still part of the modern, you know, modern movement. Is it a critical regionalist work? I don't know very well how to answer. I'm not sure it is. I'm not sure it is, but maybe it is. Its critical dimension is not very clear to me, nor its localism, although I feel it is inspired maybe intrinsically and indirectly by the Mediterranean culture to an extent, maybe even a Mediterranean culture which was influenced also not just by being part of Europe, but by you know, the cohabitation with what came from Northern Africa. It's a good work, and it's a good work. And as I said, it was done with a romantic spirit, and also with a social consciousness that that advocated democracy, but also, I mean, advocated a democracy which was not devoid of you know, plastic aesthetical aspirations, because often democracy we take for granted, and we arrive at its expression in almost indifferent aesthetical terms. But here it is not something like this, far from it. It was supposed to be a larger complex, but not everything that we see here was built. I personally like this, fragmentation of monolithical entities into smaller parts. So there is this simultaneous presence, as I mentioned, of variety within unity. You see, the geometrical and functional relationships are not very difficult to comprehend. They are rather, you know, almost mechanical. But the reality of the built work transcends the diagrammatic aspect of the plans, of the drawings. If you look at the drawings, is one thing, and if you look at the built work, is another thing. But all in all, I think there is a certain weaving here. These buildings are woven, and because they are woven, there is this you know, positive fragmentation that I associate with the labyrinth, which I think brings in mystery and brings in you know, a sense of you know, continuous discovery if you live in this building. And what is highly significant is the courtyard, the atrium, the inner void that is at the core of the building. In a way, we could talk about the presence of absence, because the void is about an absence, but somehow it coagulates all the individual interests around it. It's like, you know, let's say in a city, buildings around a beautiful square. Here we have this atrium, this vertical space, which gives identity, a sense of belonging to all the units around it. He built a lot of, or they built a lot of housing complexes also in France, but unfortunately something is gone from what they did near Barcelona at the time. And we'll arrive at this. Some of them spectacular, but with a spectacular, rather questionable and in some ways superficial compared to what is here. As you can see, the apartments are very small, but they are creative and, you know, minimal as they are, I think they are rather unique. You know, if the individual unit, like let's say these studios or these small apartments, belong to a larger entity, even if they are small, I think they are not necessarily oppressively so, because it doesn't matter how small your own you know, space is. If that small space is belonging to a larger unity, and you have that feeling of belonging to it, the space, your private space, extends through the connections with all the others, in this case around the atrium, the you know, monumental, dramatic inner space. Now, similar work to an extent, the Kafka's castle in Barcelona, and of course, there are some other projects that were done kind of in this spirit, like Moshe Safdie's Montreal Habitat in 1967. But still there are differences. Moshe Safdie didn't use color like this. He probably would not have thought to even mention Kafka, and certainly not Kafka's castle. So here there is also, again, a reference. I say again because it's a reference on one hand to Magritte, Surrealist painting, and on the other hand to literature. So this, you know, the biography of Ricardo Bofill was expressed sometimes indirectly, other times more directly, through his architecture. It's a modular architecture, but you know, the final configuration appears. You can still discern the module, but it's not a rationalistic employment of the module. And again, there is the romanticism of the whole thing. It's a castle, no? It's a small citadel. It has individuality, a strong individuality. And you can see here as well, you know, the inner space of the apartments interconnected with the inner space of the courtyards. So maybe here there is some influence coming from across the Mediterranean Sea. You know, it's this relationship with courtyards, with the labyrinth, with fragmentation, and so on. And is this feeling that I think animates this project in as much as animates the project that we just saw previously. If he would have remained in Barcelona, I like to think that, you know, and if they would have continued to work in this way, I think we would have seen more, you know, quite impressive works. Unfortunately, they moved to France, to Paris, after having a lot of success in Catalonia, and there they tried also to do some interesting works. And in a way, they are interesting, but also questionable. And you'll understand why when we arrive there. So this is Kafka's castle, also near Barcelona. And look at the, you know, it's almost an Islamic architecture if you look at it. The plans themselves are ornamental. And because of these rotations, you know, the rotation, you have a square and then you have a rotated square, and there is a static and a dynamic quality of the whole thing. But it's not conceived bidimensionally, it's conceived three-dimensionally. That's why the diagram of the plan is not oppressively imposing on the final image of the work. A utopian dream stood still. Ricardo Bofill, postmodern Parisian housing estate of Noisy-le-Grand. So now they moved to France, and this work that you are going to look at, it's, you know, it's more static, much more static than what we saw in Barcelona. And, you know, this one is still good in my opinion. It's still good in the context of Paris. It's an early work by them in Paris because it's still untouched by, you know, historicism and the ideology of historicism. But anyway, we are going to arrive at more detail of these works. Look, here they, in my opinion, they lost it because Bofill at that time, in my opinion, became absorbed and seduced by grandiose schemes, rather imperial in their spirit. And in my opinion, it didn't work. It's an architecture here that is still surprising, still dramatic, but I would say rather in a negative way. Because who lives here? You know, it's not a king, it's some poor worker in who knows where, It might be that some of these buildings are even for, almost social housing. So they are demagogical. They are not telling the truth about the lives of those people living here. I'm not trying to say that someone, with the modest circumstances should live in modest circumstances. No, but to find the correct expression, like in Barcelona, there is no historicism, there is no ideology. Here it is, and I think these buildings are, and plus they are very static. They are monumental. It's true, but they are crushingly so. And the triumphal arch and all the rest. The symmetry. It's an environment which I find actually oppressive. It's so very different from the headquarters near Barcelona, near those first buildings they built in Barcelona. Here you see, yes, it was built with effort. Yes, it was built with significant finances, but this is not a Paris. This is not built for the ministry of I don't know what. What are these columns doing here? There was no need for them. So I think this scenographic, it became very much a stage design. And or here, yes, it is impressive, but what does it say? What is its truth? Who lives here, in this, the eye of the building? Is it for God, this space? No, of course not. So there is a lot of, in my opinion, and not just my opinion, a lot of demagogy here. That's why I said that, sadly, the revolutionary became a reactionary. This is almost like some kind of modern imperial architecture. If you could marry the two. Is this a democratic architecture? Not as I saw it exemplified in Barcelona. Here it is an oppressive democracy, if it is a democracy at all. It's static, it's stiff, it's dogmatic. This is a dogmatic architecture. Yes, there is still some, because they had skilled designers in the team, but this is very different work from what they did at the beginning in Barcelona. Yes, in Barcelona, there was also monumentality, there was sculpturalness, but it was of a dynamic kind, while here, it's monolithical and it's inflated. It's in my opinion, it's a demagogical architecture. And historicism damaged it. The drawings are still nice, it's true, and I see the drawings, but these were not done by him. I used to know the name of, they had a British man who worked in the team of Taller de Arquitectura, who did very good drawings, and maybe other people as well. When I look at this drawing, I see something of the spirit of the headquarters that transformed, old factory. But what I see here, I don't see in the building. Look at this. Okay, we could say that they were influenced, or Ricardo Bofill was influenced by Ledoux and Boulet, but the times are different. This is not the 18th century, this is the 20th century, the end of the 20th century, and there is a megalomania here which is static. That fragmentation, the intricacies of what they built in Barcelona is not present here any longer. So it's a static architecture. It's monumental, but it's static and thus crushing. And there are a lot of, there is a lot of stage design, a lot of, superficialities here. I mean, look at this balcony, you would say this is a balcony from which, a Roman emperor would talk to the people. Well, how many such balconies do we have? So you know, is everybody an emperor? I doubt it. You know, I think this is not the definition of democracy that we should aspire towards. And what is here? You know, I like extravagant buildings, but there is an emphatic extravagance here, which in my opinion cannot be easily divorced from the word I just used, demagogical. Now, of course, if you look at fragments and some reflections, but in essence, the buildings are very, very, you know, emphatic in its flirtation with power, with authority, with the empire, with the king, with the emperor. You know, what is this? You know, is it some kind of a, you know, I mean, who is living here? You know, the surveyor, to use, you know, a word sometimes present in the sketches or scribblings of John Haydock. It's, in my opinion, it's an oppressive environment, and I have seen it. I was there. And the feeling I have from outside of it coincides with what I felt when I was there. The power and the weakness of representation is misleading here. You know, I mean, it's an architecture of imposing, actually, of imposition. I don't know what this protest is here, but I guess when I prepared this presentation a while ago, that protest connected with what I wanted to say. I'm not saying that, you know, visually it's an architecture without an interest. There is some interest here, but I think it's rather decorative. Now, at Montigny, les Arcades du Lac et le Viaduc, I don't know. I mean, you know, what is this? You know, a reference to les Châteaux de France, the castles of France, but those were built for, you know, a political elite. And here, the apartments, you know, the apartments, I don't know. I mean, there is a level of forced splendor here. Look at this lonely man in the foreground contemplating the so-called palace where he probably lived, a retired old man. Yes, there is the illusion of paradise on earth. When you look at this, you say, wow, you know, it's a dream come true. But looked at it more carefully, you realize that its rhetorics are removed from the reality of how life is lived today. Yes, you could say there is still something genuinely interesting here, but I still think this architecture is rather rhetorical and static and rigid, and the historicism makes it even more oppressive and questionable. Fortunately, yes, there are people on bicycles there, and the sky above it is blue, still blue in some days, but the architecture, in my opinion, is representational, and is representational in ways which I think are questionable for the end of the 20th century. So Les Arcades du Lac is an apartment building. The project is located in Montigny-le-Bretonneux, in Saint-Quentin, anyway, in France, in Europe, yes. And look at this, you know, I mean, this could have been the headquarters of IBM or some other big, you know, big business, you know, and he actually built a skyscraper in Chicago. And it might be that I have that project here shown in the same spirit. And I truly regret, I regret, and I know we are supposed to commemorate Ricardo Bofill now, and we are doing that. but we cannot stay away from truth. I regret he left Barcelona. You know, this is almost the opposite of what they were doing in Barcelona or near Barcelona. It's so static and imposing, rigid, and you know, its symmetry is decorative. It's not convincing. Yes, this part of the building, of the complex of buildings is interesting because it is on water, but I don't know. All in all, I think its rhetorics are questionable. Yes, you can still take interesting pictures, particularly with this part of the complex of buildings. But if you look at these people, you know, they probably return from work rather tired and maybe even disillusioned. They are certainly not emperors. This is not an emperor and she is not an empress. No, and the child is not a prince. So they live in these illusionary, in these architectonic illusions, because they are illusions. I'm not saying that we don't need illusions. But illusions, if they are just illusions, they end up being delusions. And, you know, that is a problem. Postmodernism in Paris. Yes, postmodernism was problematic because it employed historical you know, inspirations without being sufficiently digested. And, you know, as opposed to Louis Kahn, who digested history and was able to transform it in a modern key appropriately and convincing, most people in the postmodern time, most architects, I think, failed. Le Temple du Lac, look at this. You know, magnificence near the lake. But again, it's an unconvincing magnificence. You know, it's like a beautiful birthday cake, which can be, you know, very detrimental to the stomach because it's too sweet and too, you know, misleading in a way. It's misleading. In my opinion, there is not a lot of sincerity in this building. What does this have to do with the realities of the 20th century? You know, where do you see the cars? Where do you see the, you know, the dynamic elements, characteristics of the contemporary life? It's so static and so, you know, misleading in its being touched by the sunset light. Yes, there is the lake, which is always beautiful, and the sky, but the building is stiff. It's static, and so is the, you know, this square is very different from the vertical atrium of the housing complex near Barcelona. Here is you know, scenographic. It's a stage design. And look at this old man, you know, contemplating in solitude, and behind him the monuments. The monuments are also expressions of solitude. So the man is alone, and the buildings seem to communicate loneliness as well, as opposed to the buildings in Barcelona, which in my opinion didn't communicate loneliness. I don't think you would see this kind of human silhouette contemplated in melancholia, you know, something probably in the distance in Barcelona, as you can see here. It's the divorce between the human being and the building. They do not communicate. They don't. The building is foreign. Yes, we would call it an utopian architecture, but I think it's a misunderstood utopia. There is more utopian aspiration in the positive sense of the word in the works in Barcelona, as opposed to here, and it's historicism which affects dramatically what they built in with significant effort in France. Now, is this in front of San Pietro in Rome? No, of course not. So, you know, the references to the Renaissance and the post-Renaissance are misleading. You know, it's an architecture of illusions. In a way, it's more real what we see here in the foreground, you know, as opposed to the majestic triumphalist. It is, in my opinion, a triumphalist architecture. I'm so surprised and so sad that he transformed in this way. You know, no, no. Antigone district. And look at the plan. You'd almost say that this axis leads right into, you know, some kind of a, you know, center, you know, Christianity, or I don't know what. What is here at the end of this big avenue? You know, what is the? There are still apartment buildings. You know, they are lying. This is an architecture of lying. I'm sorry. I'm not against dreaming. I'm not against utopia. I like this drawing, but despite its graphic skill, it's not telling the truth. I mean, the humble sketch by Sigurd Leverens, the Swedish architect, engineer turned architect, is much more valuable than what we see here, because it's not about the skill of the drawing. Of course, the drawing is well done, but what it represents for the end of the 20th century is almost unacceptable. And I'm saying it from a city where I am now, where there were such things built also, you know, towards the end of the 20th century by a totalitarian regime in the name of the people. This is not really for the people. When you look at this, you would say this is the ministry of I don't know what. Well, what ministry? These are supposed to be apartment buildings, right? And what is this? You know, what is this here? You know, is an emperor going to, on horse, going to pass through this? You know, a Roman emperor? No way. No, I regret. I regret that Bofill was not aware of the trappings of this. I like more these buildings, actually, these banal buildings nearby. You know, telling the truth about our life today, more modest, not in terms of height, but in terms of the expression, the architectural expression. Here is a total failure, in my opinion, and I'm surprised. This is the skyscraper they built in Chicago. Look at this. Did it need this melodrama at the top? And when I said France and glass destroyed Ricardo Bofill, here is another example. You know, he was, and we are going to end this presentation with the work they built in Northern Africa, in Morocco, where he returned to the wall in good measure. And I think he was and was a good architect of the wall and of the small window, not of the large glass surfaces, because this was not him. We remember the small windows in the housing complex Waldon 7 near Barcelona. You know, this is almost ridiculous. I mean, it's incredible to me that an architect of his abilities and his aspirations and his accomplishments would do something like this, you know, topped with this unconvincing ending of the building. So one of the more colorful figures in architectural history was the 15th century Florentine financier Giovanni Rucellai. The third richest man in Florence, he was the money behind Leon Battista Alberti's designs for the Palazzo Rucellai and the facade of Santa Maria Novella, both in Florence. But he also was behind one of my favorite maxims. This is, I don't know who wrote this. Men have two roles. The first is to procreate, and the second is to build. And man builds to honor God and to bring glory to his city and his family. Whoever wrote this text ended by saying, Ricardo Bofill has certainly done that. Well, I wouldn't be too carried away by this, you know, honoring God and bringing glory into the city and the family. In 1976, RBTA was commissioned by the Société des Autoroutes du Sud-Est de la France to build this monument on the Catalan highway border between Spain and France. Sorry, an S is missing there. And here you see the monument. I think he was, you know, as long as he, but even here, the way he planted this monument, fortunately, these columns are twisted, but otherwise you will see the hill is almost tortured into a perfect pyramid, and the monument is placed there very emphatically, you know, very rigidly and very yeah, it's static. And you know, I would rather have the hills and the mountains like they are. You know, if the mansion was made of God, why craft the hill, you know, in this way? Why torture it into this geometrical rigidity? I find it pretentious and sad. Ultimately, the temple itself has some qualities because of the twisted columns, but otherwise, you know, the geometrization of the hill, in my opinion, is very problematic. Okay, do the monument as you want to do it. You are the architect, but don't torture the hill. Don't torture the mountain. Don't geometrize it. Don't mess with God, in other words. And he did. And I don't think it's in this way that one honors nature, thus one honors God. No, it's not. Now, the National Theatre of Catalonia, in my opinion, is a disaster. And it's a disaster because it is affected by Its Majesty glass and by his experience in France. Look at this, you know, what do these columns have to do? I understand he wanted to create some kind of a conjunctio oppositorum, the conjunction of opposites. But historicism doesn't work well with these large surfaces of glass. Really, it's very unconvincing, and I regret he built it, and I regret Barcelona, which has a, you know, a great tradition in architecture, allowed for this to happen. But it did happen. So I only have this image, and now we go to the last work that I show. I could have showed other works, including the last work, one of the last works, maybe the last work he did, a hotel, very commercial, all covered in glass in Barcelona. If you are curious, you can look on the web, but I just couldn't include it in this rather short presentation about him. But let's look at this work in Morocco, which I think does have some qualities. And it has some qualities exactly because he returns to the wall. The Mohammed VI, the Polytechnic University in this place in Morocco, here is a sketch. What is good also in this later work is that he gave up on that historicism that we saw abundantly externalized and used in France. So we also see, I think he was comfortable with the influence coming from, as I said, from Northern Africa. You know, there is ornamentation, but it's an ornamentation of substance, not of form, not of externality, like he used a little bit in France. This is this fragmentation in his later work here in Morocco connects, I think, with those early works in Barcelona. And yes, we have plenty of opaque walls, and I think they are more convincing than the large surfaces of glass. Of course, there is also the influence of, you know, a certain kind of even deconstruction or even parametricism in a way. It's on one hand, we have, yes, this wall architecture, which could be connected in a certain way with what we call postmodernism, but there is no historicism, and that's good. We see here the return of the window. This is a window that was to be found also in that, you know, factory where they had their headquarters. All in all, I think he was good. They were good. They are good. They were good taller de architectura with operating within the field of walls, opaque walls, sometimes with dramatic openings, but again, no historicism. And that's a good thing. So the level of abstraction is higher in this work than we have seen in France. There are still touches of, you know, a certain nostalgia for a certain kind of column. Risky, but less disturbingly so than in the works in France, I would say. Still, the architecture is more static than what we saw in Barcelona. Fortunately, there is this, but it's both fortunately and unfortunately, because this is kind of a borrowing from a certain architecture that is, you know, often seen these days. I think there is still a rift, a schismatic mentality at play. On one hand, a certain nostalgia for a certain wall architecture and column architecture. And then we have, of course, also slanted constructive entities and you know, modulated, rather fluid, kind of fluid roof. The architecture is not fluid, but you know, even if it operates within the field of strong geometry and squares and so on, I think it has a level of you know, being acceptable, at least, if not convincing. But his dualities are shown even here, because on one hand is this architecture, and part of the same complex, he also has this. I'm not against contrasts, but somehow, strangely, he seems to welcome Miss van der Rohe. You remember when he said, or they said, for them, for Thaler de Architectura and Ricardo Bofill, Magritte, the Belgian surrealist painter, was more important than Miss van der Rohe. Well, this is not really, doesn't have the refinement, the subtleties of Miss van der Rohe, but it's still an architecture that you could somehow, you know, even obliquely associate with Miss, as opposed to this architecture. So here we have the duality. This architecture and this architecture, they are both rather static, but at least, thank God, there isn't any longer an obvious and sadly decorative historicism. There are here and there some you know, slight references to a certain kind of architecture, but not alarmingly bothering, exactly because it's not an architecture any longer, you know, entertaining illusions about an insufficiently digested history. The interior is modern through and through. We have the dialogue schismatic as it is between, well, it's not really red, but pointing in the direction of redness, and then we have whiteness, and we have the tension between the two. There is in this later work also, you can see him pendulating between two different ways of doing architecture and two different expressions in a way. The roofing with a certain fluidity, this column which is not structural as it is, which is not historicist. Then we have some references here to the static columns of history. We have rhythm, we have diagonals, but all in all, it's not an architecture as disturbingly, as I said, as disturbingly, ideological. It's not ideological as the works built in France. That is, here you will see, in an almost explicit way, a reference to the factory, the headquarters near Barcelona, but this is across the Mediterranean Sea. Yes, it's a university complex with some qualities, some problems too. You might even see some touches of Vittorio Gregotti here in a way, if you want. That's it. So